Hello viewers, I am Professor Sharanjeet, working at the Rajiv Gandhi National University of Law, Punjab. In today's lecture, we shall discuss counselling and mental health of prisoners. As we all know, health and well-being are important facets of life. According to the World Health Organization, health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of a disease or infirmity. There was a point in time when health was considered to be only the physical well-being of an individual, but with the passage of time, it was realized that mental health is as important as physical well-being. Indeed, there is no health without mental health. So, what is mental health? According to the World Health Organization, mental health can be considered to be a state of well-being in which a person realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to his or her society. Dear viewers, now we shall discuss the mental health in prison environment. The prisoners are vulnerable to mental health problems on account of anxiety, stress, lack of contact with family and family support, and concern about the well-being of their family members and dependents. They may feel helpless for not attending to family needs during emergency situations too. The mental health issues among the prisoners can be on account of substance abuse, substance withdrawal related complications during incarceration, lack of sleep, personality disorders, anxiety and mood disorders, adjustment and stress related disorders. With regards to the under trial prisoners, it can be on account of the suspension of trials, delay in court hearings, and uncertainty about the course of the trial. Prisoners awarded the death penalty and applying for a mercy petition may experience stress regarding the outcome of the petition. The stigma associated with incarceration may also aggravate the mental health of the prisoners. So, what is stigma? Stigma refers to a set of negative attitudes and beliefs based on certain preconceived notions. The convict prisoner may have negative feelings of being stigmatized by his family, friends, and close, near, and dear ones. Listeners, now we shall focus on the international perspective on the mental health of the prisoners. Rule 58 of the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners, popularly known as the Nelson Mandela Rules, emphasizes the contact of the prisoner with the outside world. It says that the prisoners shall be allowed, under necessary supervision, to communicate with their family and friends at regular intervals. Prisons should allocate prisoners to the extent possible to prisons close to their homes or their places of social rehabilitation as stated in Rule 59. Rule 62 further states that prisoners or foreign nationals shall be allowed reasonable facilities to communicate with the diplomatic and consular representative of the state to which they belong. Rule 64 mandates that every prison cell must have a library adequately stocked with both recreational and instructional books for the use of all categories of prisoners, and prisoners should be actively encouraged to fully utilize it. Rule 65 requires the appointment of a qualified representative of the same religion if there are a sufficient number of prisoners of that religion in the prison. According to Rule 66, the prison should allow every prisoner, as far as possible, to attend the services provided in the prison and possess the necessary books, religious observance, and instructions to satisfy their religious needs. Rule 106 emphasizes the need for special attention to be paid to the maintenance and improvement of such relations between a prisoner and his or her family as is desirable in the best interests of both. With respect to female prisoners, the United Nations rules for the treatment of women prisoners and non-custodial measures for women offenders, popularly known as the Bangkok Rules, have elaborated upon specific principles for the incarceration of the female prisoners. The Bangkok Rules emphasize personal hygiene, healthcare services, gender-specific healthcare, mental health care, HIV prevention, treatment and support, substance abuse treatment programs, and suicide and self-harm prevention methods of the female inmates. Rule 12 specifically states that an individualized, gender-sensitive, trauma-informed, and comprehensive mental health care and rehabilitation program should be made available for women prisoners with mental health care needs in prison or in non-custodial settings. Furthermore, Rule 13 requires prison staff to be aware of times when women may feel particularly distressed in order to be sensitive to the situation and provide appropriate support. Rule 16 states that developing and implementing strategies in consultation with mental health care and social welfare services to prevent suicide and self-harm by women prisoners and providing appropriate gender-specific and specialized support to those in need. There shall be a comprehensive policy of mental health care in female prisons. Rule 26 deals with women prisoners' contact with their families. Rule 27 says that where conjugal visits are allowed, women prisoners shall be able to exercise this right on an equal basis with men. Rule 35 states that prison staff must receive training to detect mental health care needs and risks of self-harm and suicide among female prisoners and to provide support and refer such cases to the specialists. Now we shall discuss the legal framework in India. The Mental Health Care Act 2017 devised a legal framework to emphasize the importance of mental health as a component of the overall well-being of the individual. This act has also dealt with the issue of mental illness among the prison inmates. As per this law, a prisoner with mental illness is a person with mental illness who is under trial or convicted of an offence and detained in a jail or a prison. This act mandates the constitution of a mental health review board which shall visit and inspect prisons and seek clarification from the medical officer in charge. The board may inquire why the prison has kept a prisoner with mental illness instead of transferring them for treatment to a mental health establishment. This act also mandates the training of all medical officers in prisons to provide basic and emergency health care. Section 103 of the Mental Health Care Act 2017 deals with prisoners with mental illness. The section elaborately deals with prisoners with mental illness. It provides for the transfer of a prisoner with a mental illness to the psychiatric ward in the medical wing of the prison. If the medical wing does not have a psychiatric ward, the board may grant permission for the prisoner to be transferred to a mental health establishment. The concerned board shall use the prescribed methods, modalities, and procedures to effect the transfer of a prisoner under this section. The medical officer of a prison shall send a quarterly report to the concerned board certifying therein that there are no prisoners with mental illness in the prison or jail. The board may visit the prison or jail and inquire why the medical officer has kept any prisoner with mental illness in the prison or jail instead of transferring them for treatment to the mental health establishment. The appropriate government should establish a mental health establishment in the medical wing of at least one prison in each state and union territory and should refer and care for prisoners with mental illness in the said medical establishment. The Mental Health Care Rights of Persons with Mental Illness Rules 2018 provide the following provisions regarding the minimum standard for mental health care in the prisons. Prisons should promptly and properly identify people with mental health problems. Identification of persons with serious mental illness and proper treatment and follow-up for this group. Ensuring the availability of minimum psychiatric medication in prisons to facilitate prompt treatment. Availability of psychosocial intervention for prisoners with a range of mental health problems. Protocols for dealing with prisoners with suicide risk, behavioral problems and crisis related to mental illness as well as to the prison life. Suitable rehabilitation services for prisoners with mental illness is also mandated. Dear viewers, now we shall talk about the implementation of a national mental health program inside the prisons. Dealing with the psychological stress of prison life through counseling for stress needs to be provided to all the prisoners in both individual and group settings. The prisoners should be encouraged to proactively seek help for any emotional problems, substance abuse problems, or physical health problems. Training the prison staff in simple counseling skills can be done. Empowering some of the most sensitive and motivated convicted prisoners to be effective peer counselors can also help in this aspect. As per the National Legal Services to the Mentally Ill and Mentally Disabled Persons 2015, there should be regular inspections by the State Legal Service Authority and the State Mental Health Authority to identify cases of inmates suffering from mental illness. The State Legal Service Authority shall seek directions from the respective High Court for the treatment and shifting of these persons. The Board of Visitors must visit psychiatric homes or any such facility and assess the living condition of the inmates. Constitute a team of psychologists, psychiatrists, and counselors to visit jails and assess the mental health of the inmates. In the case of Ravinder Kumar Dhariwal versus Union of India 2023, the Supreme Court observed, while dealing with the Indian legal framework regarding the issue of mental illness, the 2017 Act provided a rights-based framework for mental health care and had a truly transformative potential. The 2017 Act was enacted by Parliament in pursuance of India's obligation under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, repealing the Mental Health Care Act of 1987. In another case of accused X versus State of Maharashtra 2019, the Supreme Court made the following observations. The appellate court shall consider post-conviction mental illness as a mitigating factor in death sentence cases. The burden of proof shall be on the accused to demonstrate through active, residual or prodromal symptoms that the mental illness was manifesting. Courts must establish a panel of qualified professionals, medical experts and criminologists, while the state may offer evidence to rebut the claim. Another issue with regards to prison is the suicides in prisons. Unnatural deaths in prisons due to suicides by inmates are very common. Inmates can commit suicide by hanging, poisoning, self-inflicted injuries or drug overdose. Before their execution, prisoners sentenced to death may also choose to commit suicide. Here the term death row is also associated with such prisoners. Death row refers to a prison block or section for those sentenced to capital punishment. Another possible reference is a person awaiting execution. In the Indian context, due to the immense caseload, the problem has further aggravated due to the COVID-19 pandemic and consequent disturbance in the functioning of the courts. The trial takes years and years to finally conclude. This is highly serious with regards to the persons who are found guilty of some capital offence. It is like a double punishment. Other factors such as overcrowding have crippled the prison administration, further aggravating the problem. The death row has a detrimental effect as the prisoner constantly lives under the shadow of death. Many such prisoners have even committed suicides in jails. From the convict's perspective, the matter also experiences delays as they seek to exhaust all available legal remedies. In December 2020, around 404 prisoners were on the death row in India. The cumbersome legal procedures and prolonged period of solitary confinement are cruel and inhuman. Psychologists call this condition as the death row phenomena, in which prisoners spending years awaiting their execution go through great mental torture, a fact that was recognized by the European Court of Human Rights in 1989. The Supreme Court held in the landmark case of Shatrughan Chauhan and another versus Union of India and others 2014 that all death row convicts must receive regular mental health evaluations and appropriate medical care. The court further stated that before the execution, after consulting the government psychiatrists and doctors, if the superintendent finds the prisoner not fit mentally, she must stop the execution, produce the prisoner in front of a medical board for a comprehensive evaluation, and forward the report to the state government for further action. As per the prison statistics in India, for the year 2022, across India's prisons, 119 prisoners died by suicides in 2022, which was 21% lower than 2021. Overall, there were 1995 deaths in prisons in 2022, of which 8% were unnatural. Suicides formed 3/4 of the unnatural deaths. The Supreme Court of India appointed a committee in 2018 to study unnatural deaths among the prisoners in the country. The committee provided the information that out of the 817 unnatural deaths, 660 were suicides, with Uttar Pradesh recording the highest number of suicides at 101 during this period. Suicide is a major cause of the 817 unnatural deaths reported in jails across the country between 2017 and 2021 as per this report by the committee. The committee recommended finding possible places for hanging and anchoring in the current designs of prison buildings. The committee also recommended the use of collapsible materials to construct cells and barracks that are less prone to suicide attempts. The Supreme Court constituted this committee in 2018. The committee observed that suicide is a major cause of unnatural death among the prisoners. The committee had recommended that the jail staff be trained to recognize warning signs and devise appropriate mechanisms to safeguard life in the prisons. The committee also recommended that the jail staff should be regularly provided the requisite training to recognize signs of depression and disturbed behavior, which may include suicidal intent, and should mandatorily provide psychological first aid to the prisoners as per the requirements. The committee recommended that every prison have a suicide prevention program starting from identification to medical treatment so that any such possibility can be thwarted. Now we shall talk about the role of the National Human Rights Commission in preventing suicides in the Indian prisons. The National Human Rights Commission has been working towards preventing avoidable loss of life by suggesting various measures to save lives in prisons. It gave detailed guidelines in 2014 on the prevention of suicides in the prisons. The National Human Rights Commission issued an advisory on 19th June 2023 to mitigate deliberate self-harm and suicide attempts by the prisoners, as the incidence of suicides in prison did not decrease. It includes the following: filling up the vacancies and documenting the strength and training of prison staff. Prison staff must undergo basic training in mental health literacy and psychological first aid administration. Additionally, the prison staff must receive training in handling attempted hanging, bleeding through self-inflicted cuts, or ingesting toxic substances. Additionally, the initial health screening report for every prisoner must include mental health screening. If the preliminary screening identifies signs and symptoms of a mental health disorder, the prison should consult a mental health professional. The state should have 2 levels of monitoring: mental health and trained medical staff assisted by prison staff. There should be observation of inmates. Prison staff should regularly monitor inmates and assign a prisoner buddy trained in psychological first aid. Prison staff should not employ prisoners who have suicidal tendencies to jobs that involve the use of sharp instruments. The custody of knives and agricultural sharp or pointed objects should be carefully counted and managed post-use. Telephone contact with friends or family of the prisoner must be ensured. High-risk prisoners should be shifted to premises that enable 24/7 monitoring with the help of CCTV cameras. Family members of the high-risk inmates must be contacted to give them the required assurance, counselling, and mental support. The gatekeeper model, as devised by the World Health Organization, should also be used to strengthen mental health care in prisons by carefully training selected inmates to identify prisoners at risk of suicide. Prison authorities must ensure that fellow prisoners do not disturb prisoners with mental health issues. Programs on mental health should be organized to sensitize the prisoners. The Commission also mandates compliance with relevant statutory provisions, for instance, Section 103 of the Mental Health Care Act. It is necessary to follow Rules 7, 10 and 11 of the Mental Health Care Rights of Persons with Mental Illness Rules 2018, which pertain to free legal aid and modalities for transferring prisoners with mental health issues. The state and union territories must identify one prison for setting up mental health establishments under Section 103, subsection 6 of the Act. The National Human Rights Commission has recommended 7 pointers as housekeeping measures to prevent prisoners from committing suicide in response to the rising trend of suicides in the prisons. Keeping aggressive and corrosive chemicals and tools for building beyond the reach of the prisoners, regularly checking blankets and bed sheets of inmates for objects that might be used in self-harm, identifying areas that might be suitable for committing suicide, installing CCTV cameras in those areas, keeping the barracks and toilets free from points that can be used for suicide by hanging, and designing toilet doors in a manner that allows keeping vigil while ensuring privacy. The National Human Rights Commission also recommends reducing the waiting time for meeting with prisoners to ensure emotional support for the prisoners. The National Human Rights Commission advisory recommends providing prisoners with life skill based education and activities, as well as facilities for upskilling, vocational guidance and means for financial independence to improve the prison environment for the inmates. In the end, I would like to conclude, unnatural deaths or deaths by suicide are quite common in the Indian prisons. First, prison authorities should identify prisoners who have suicidal tendencies or who seem to be suffering from mental health issues in order to prevent suicides in the prisons. Prison authorities should carefully monitor such prisoners. In this regard, the use of CCTV cameras is also recommended. Secondly, as already discussed, the separation of prisoners from their families may lead to mental health disorders due to a lack of interaction with the loved ones. Therefore, providing social support through trained prisoners known as buddies or listeners has been found to be an effective measure in preventing suicides in prisons. Many countries also use the gatekeeper model. The gatekeeper model requires training selected prisoners to identify and refer prisoners at risk of suicide to treatment or supportive services. A doctor should also supervise the high-risk prisoners and administer medication as necessary. Counseling the prisoners, as discussed above by the prison management staff and the convicted prisoners, can help reduce the distress and emotional turmoil of the prisoner suffering from mental health problems. With this, we come to an end of today's lecture. Thank you.